On the 29th of January 1820, George IV became King of Great Britain and Ireland. His estranged wife, Caroline of Brunswick, had been living in Europe since 1814. The couple had never got on and had separated soon after the birth of their daughter, Princess Charlotte. The king had no intention of Caroline becoming his Queen Consort, and by the summer of 1820, to prevent her claim, he initiated proceedings for a divorce. In the early 19th century, a divorce enabling the former husband or wife to remarry required an Act of Parliament. However, it was usual for the initial manoeuvring to take place in the civil courts. Here, one party would sue the other for divorce, usually on the grounds of criminal conversation or adultery, or non-consummation. But as a pamphlet of 1816 explained, it was unlikely that the Prince Regent, as George then was, would wish to risk proceeding this way, as it would have left Caroline open to countersuing, meaning embarrassment and further delay. Moving the case straight to the House of Lords thus made sense, but it required a slightly different mechanism to the normal process by which a divorce arrived at the courts. This left George forced to contemplate a much riskier approach. He opted to proceed by a bill of pains and penalties, which enabled the Lords to convict Caroline of certain crimes and to impose a sentence upon her. In this case, it enabled George to ensure that she was stripped of any rights as a princess or queen, and declared their marriage forever wholly dissolved, annulled, and made void. But as the case developed, certain provisions proved contentious and had to be dropped. One of the potential difficulties for the king was that a number of members of the administration were closely associated with Caroline. George Canning, for example, was even rumoured to have been one of Caroline's lovers. The Prime Minister, Lord Liverpool, was eager, if possible, to avoid the public scandal of Caroline's return to England, and dispatched Henry Brougham to attempt to persuade her to continue her exile in Europe. He was unsuccessful, and Caroline's return was greeted by enthusiastic crowds who resorted to breaking the windows of people who would not demonstrate their support for her. This forced the administration to take the case to Parliament. Caroline's decision not to give way made the case before the Lords inevitable. But Liverpool's eagerness to compound if possible had led the king to consider replacing him as Prime Minister with Lord Sidmouth. To a greater or lesser extent, the sides divided on party lines, with the Whigs coming out for Caroline and the Tories for the king. On the 4th of July 1820, the Secret Committee of the Lords, established to examine the affair, reported its confirmation of Caroline's guilt. The next day, having failed to find a compromise, Liverpool presented the Bill of Pains and Penalties to the House of Lords. The trial was thus not a hearing in court, but a proceeding in Parliament where evidence was heard for and against the bill before the members. The debate was opened for the government by Liverpool, seconded by Lord Harrowby, to a crowded, though by no means full, House. Proceedings in the Lords persisted beyond a summer adjournment, with the Lords debating the case again in September and on into the autumn. As well as causing disruption to the members of both houses, the trial was a major public event. Seats were available for elite spectators within the palace, while crowds gathered outside to jostle those making their way in and out. Lord Castlereagh, effective leader in the Commons, had worked hard to prepare the ground to receive the bill in the lower house. But when the third reading passed the Lords by just 9 votes, the government decided to drop the bill. The ensuing chaos was reported in the Times, which queried, "Where will these things end?" Caroline of Brunswick remained married to George IV until her death on the 7th of August 1821.